Delighted to be joined by the Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace now. Good morning to you.
Morning.
Good morning. I gather the fire alarm test going off in the House of Commons has finally stopped, so that's helpful. We can actually get you on the line. Right, well, let's talk about the defence side of things here. Huge sums of money, £16.5 billion. It really does address that shortfall you had of up to £13 billion in your 10-year equipment plans. How were you able to persuade the Chancellor, who doesn't seem to find money for a lot of other things, other demands from other departments, to give up that much cash?
Well, I think that's about unfair on the Chancellor. He's spent £200 billion on COVID response, whether that's upgrading universal credit, support to businesses, and a lot of other things. And I think that is that perhaps puts £16.5 billion in perspective. We spend £170 billion alone on health. So I think what I would say is, in the end, the Prime Minister absolutely knows that one of the planks in delivering both global Britain, but also response to this COVID, is our armed forces. Resilience is what we do. We provide defence and security and the knowledge of how to get through crises across the whole of government. Right from day one, we've had people in every single department nearly off Whitehall helping them get through this. We have 3,000 troops in Liverpool. And, we often hear people say, I support our armed forces, but that has to be followed by investment. And that's why we need to make sure we give them the right equipment to match the foe. I used to come on your show quite a lot when I was the security minister, which meant that I spent 3 years looking at the threat nearly every single day. And we were in danger of being overtaken by our adversaries. And we all remember what happened with the Snatch Land Rover in Afghanistan. We all remember how many people lost their lives because there had failed to be the investment in the right equipment or the right tactics to meet the threat. And I think, that is, as Defence Secretary and a former soldier, that is not something I want to see happen. And the Prime Minister totally agrees and believes that one of our best exports and our best, parts of government is defence. And that's why he's put his money where his mouth is and invested in us.
Talk to us about this National Cyber Force that's going to be created alongside the new Space Command. Again, it all sounds very futuristic, but this is basically how future battles are likely to be fought, isn't it?
Well, it's one of the parts of it, yes. I mean, we're not going to neglect the conventional armed forces and run off the two new shiny things of cyber and space. We are also, in that money, investing in our conventional armed forces. We're doing better by our men and women of our armed forces. We will provide free wraparound childcare for them up until the age of 11. Their children are 11. So we'll invest in the people and their homes and their infrastructure, but also what we know is that our adversaries have spotted our vulnerabilities. We are very dependent in the West on space, our satellites. Everything from cash points to our mobile phones need satellites, and our adversaries have been testing weapons in space. They have been firing missiles into space, anti-satellite capabilities, and unless we provide some resilience and indeed protect those assets, we can spend all the money in the world on conventional forces, but if someone pulls the plug on our satellites, then we would not know what to do. We wouldn't be able to be coordinated enough. So we've got to protect that vulnerability, and it's not just military, but it's our economy's vulnerabilities. Okay. And then in cyber, again, it goes to the point, I could spend lots and lots of money on missiles, but if someone hacks my control system, I won't be able to fire them. And therefore, it's really important that we not only defend our cyber capabilities, but we also have the capability to potentially do to our adversaries what they may do to us. So,
okay.
That's really important as well.
Okay, I think a lot of my listeners would absolutely understand, and again, that's where an awful lot of money is going to be spent. Let's also talk about the huge costs of the lockdown. We know from one of your colleagues being on my show, Robert Jenrick, that the government didn't carry out any cost-benefit analysis of what the likely costs of a lockdown would be. We know there are huge economic costs. We know there are huge health costs. Excess mortality right now is at home, under 65. It's not people dying of COVID in hospital. That's not where the exodus are coming from. On the 4th of November, your boss, Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, said, "Believe me, COVID lockdown restrictions in England will end on December the 2nd. Will they?
Well, we will go into a tiered system from the lockdown on the 2nd of December. And what those tiers are and which parts of the country go into the tiers will be defined in, I'm guessing, that final week before the 2nd of December based on the most recent statistics. I would love to sit here like you and talk about getting back to normal as soon as possible. I'm a Lancashire MP. Lancashire and my constituency has been literally in a lockdown. They were a tier 3 area before, going right back to almost July. And we'd all like to get out of it. I know the personal cost of that type of lockdown. I also know the personal cost to many of the businesses in my constituency, and we would love it to get back to normal. But I also know in the Northwest, I was visiting Liverpool on Monday, the cost to the NHS and indeed to people's lives off not dealing with this horrendous COVID infection. And, Julia, I don't think anyone has a 100% answer between that balance between livelihoods and lives.
Don't we?
I think
I think it's a really, really simple equation. If a lockdown policy costs more lives than it saves, then you don't have a lockdown. You said we're going to go into a tiered system. The quote was, believe me, COVID lockdown restrictions in England will end on December the 2nd. If we go back into tier 3, that's no travel in and out of an area, no mixing between households, indoors or outdoors, rule of 6 if we are allowed out, pubs and bars are only allowed to serve if they've got a substantial meal and the like, gyms still closed, libraries, hairdressers and the like. In what way is that not a version of lockdown?
Well, hang on. I didn't say everyone's going to go straight into a tier 3. I said what those tiers are and how they're applied will be, announced obviously in advance of that lifting.
You think some parts of the country could go back into tier 2?
Well, all I know is that if I look at the tier 3 lockdowns, is they had some positive effect. Especially when, I remember, I think it was Bolton in my part of the world, locked down by also reducing pubs, etc. activity. I think they actually closed their pubs, whereas in other parts of my constituency or Lancashire, that didn't happen. So we know that different measures have different effects. And we also know that different parts of the country have different population density, and population density clearly contributes to some of the spread of this disease. So I think there are measures to be taken. We're not going to eradicate on the 2nd of December COVID. We know it's highly infectious. What we do hope, though, and we are on track to do it, is in parallel to improving the track and trace. That's why I went to Liverpool, for example, to see that pilot. We are now seeing closer and closer the delivery of a vaccine. The armed forces, for example, one of the reasons the PM wanted to invest in us is that right now our armed forces are planning how we're going to deliver that vaccine to people and those key cohorts of people.
But realistically, once we've got a vaccine that works and it's all manufactured and we know that's already ongoing, we are not looking at even the over 60s all being vaccinated before Easter. What hope does that hold out? Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think I am. We're going to be, until the government makes a political decision not to continue this, we're going to be in severe restrictions in terms of what businesses can do, who can be open, who can't, who we can see in our own homes or anywhere else. We're going to face severe restrictions pretty much for the rest of most of next year.
Well, look, I certainly hope we're not.
We hope we're not, but we are, aren't we?
Well, look, we are not alone in having to have these difficult decisions.
Totally irrelevant. You're not the defence secretary for France or America. You're defence secretary for this country.
No, but it isn't irrelevant. I mean, so people often hark about Sweden, but if you look, Sweden has just imposed a new lockdown that I think will actually see people going to prison if they don't comply with it. So, look,
no. Can I point out? No, Sweden's death rate is still incredibly low. This is their lockdown rules are something akin to where we were in tier 1, for goodness sake.
Well, no, I think you'll find that Sweden has just launched some new lockdown measures quite severe.
I know there are some severe measures, but they actually are not much more severe than we were in far long ago.
I think, we are, it isn't irrelevant how other countries in Europe are dealing with it. We're all developed economies and we all have that challenge. On one hand, my personal wish is to try and get back to normal as much as possible. But as a constituency MP who represents a part of the area that has had extra restrictions, but also in the Northwest, high death rates and a high throughput into hospitals, I have to look at the facts as I see them. And I think, what we're trying to do is slow down the rate of spread and slow down the rate of infection, and at the same time improve the test and tracing regime so that you and I, in the end, can get a test very quickly and then know we're clear and go into work.
Well, hold on a minute. The Prime Minister got a test very quickly. We know he hasn't got the COVID virus. We know he can't realistically be infected with the COVID virus again. He's already had it. We know that people keep immunity, vast majority. And yet he's still self-isolating. What's the point of getting a test showing you're negative if you still have to self-isolate?
Well, look, the government has, I think, already said that it's going to look at some of these timings around it. But I also recognise that, we're trying to set a set of rules to guide most people. And that's, the rules are you isolate for 14 days. I had COVID at the end of March. Like everyone else, I probably dread the ping on my mobile phone saying that somewhere I came in contact with and I'm going to have to self-isolate. But in reality, that is for the common good, trying to get through this, Julia. But what I can say is things like the rollout of vaccines. The reason we've got the army involved already in it is I'd like to make it as quick as possible. I'd like to use as many people as possible to get the vaccine to as many people as quickly.
And you've done the logistics, finally. I know I've taken you over your time, but you've done the logistics on this. You deal with facts, so does the army. That we know the army can roll this stuff out, is what they do. How quickly can we inoculate and vaccinate the entire population and get back to normal life?
Well, look, we have...
You must have an idea.
Well, look, it depends on the demand signal of the Department of Health. If they want it to be done really, really quickly, as I have said to them, you can have my planes, my people, my vehicles. We obviously have other defence tasks that we have to maintain.
Give me a date.
I won't give you the date yet because I think...
Do you have one?
Yet. Well, no, I don't have one yet, but I know we can do an awful lot very quickly.
I'm not going to get a date. I'm going to give up. I'm not going to get a date. We'll have to let it go there. I know we're over time. Defence Secretary Ben Wallace, I really appreciate you joining us.